All right, so in this video, we want to prove whether this function is going to be odd or even. So remember, if a function is even, we know that f of x equals to f of negative x. And if a function is odd, we know that negative f of x equals to f of negative x. This is how we prove it algebraically. So we always test for even functions first, and then if the function is not even, we'll test to see whether it's odd or not. Let's start with this function here. Let's start by finding f of negative x. I'm just going to replace my x with a negative x over here. And then negative x squared is just positive x squared because the negative squared is always positive. And what you notice is that f of x is the same as f of negative x. These two equations are identical, which means that my function is even. I don't have to even test for odd here because I've already found it's even. Let's go to the second example. We have f of x equals to sine x plus x. So let's start with f of negative x again to test if it's even. So this is sine of negative x plus negative x. And we can simplify this a bit. So sine of negative x, positive and negative just gives me minus x. So this is definitely not even because these two functions are not the same over here. This is a plus x, this is a minus x. Pretty easy to tell they're different. So let's test for odd. Let's find negative f of x. Negative f of x, you just take a negative sign and you put the entire function into a bracket. And now I'm going to multiply this negative sign into the bracket. And now I'm going to compare these two, f of negative x with negative f of x. Are these two the exact same? Well, we know negative x are exact the same, but is sine of negative x the same as negative sine of x? Well, you have to know your trig functions really well to answer this question, but what does sine of negative x look like? Well, let's just talk about sine of x. We know sine of x, oops, I'll just draw it like this actually. So sine of x looks like this. Let's talk about sine of negative x. Sine of negative x is a reflection in the y-axis. It's going to look like this. And negative sine of x, what does negative sine of x look like? Negative sine of x is a reflection in the x-axis, which is also going to look like this. So technically, sine of negative x is the exact same as negative sine of x. And if you want, you could rewrite this equation over here. I'll squeeze it in as negative sine x minus x because sine of negative x is the exact same as negative sine of x. So now f of negative x is the exact same as f of negative f of x, which means that this is an odd function. You do have to know your trig rules pretty well and your regular rules for all types of functions as well to be able to answer these questions. And finally, let's go to the third and last question. F of x equals 1 over x minus x. Let's start by finding f of negative x. F of negative x is 1 over negative x minus negative x. And now we can simplify this. So 1 over negative x is just negative 1 over x. And negative make it positive x. So these two are definitely not the same. We can tell that both the signs are not the same. So it's definitely not even. Let's test for odd now. Negative f of x is just negative, and then I put the entire function into the bracket. Now I'll multiply this negative into the bracket, and I get negative 1 over x plus x. As you can tell, f of negative x is the exact same as negative f of x, making this an odd function.